Well, the head of Canada's largest private sector union is in Ottawa this week with a few choice words for the Bank of Canada. She's accusing its governor, Tiff Macklem, of waging war on workers. Lana Payne is the president of Unifor. Lana Payne, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with your comments about the Bank of Canada saying they're waging class warfare, particularly on workers. What do you mean by that?
Well, they're rapidly raising interest rates. Inflation isn't going down, and they're causing a lot more pain out there than we need to have. I think everyone needs to take a pause right now, have a look at what are the correct policy solutions to what's going on in the world. This isn't the 1970s anymore. It isn't the same 1970s economy, and therefore the solutions to inflation are perhaps a lot different than what they were at that time. We're coming out of a pandemic. Wages are trying to catch up with inflation. They're nowhere near it. We have, outside of this problem with inflation now, we have high interest rates. Mm-hmm. So it's like pain upon pain upon pain. And then there's those two comments by the governor of the Bank of Canada, which are very troubling for working people and for unions particularly.
That the job market is overheated.
The first one to the CFIB, where he says, don't worry about things, keep wages low, you won't have to put up with inflation for very long. So basically giving a message to suppress wages of working people. And now, last week, we need more unemployment in order to solve the problem. Well, who do you think is going to be unemployed? It's working people. And he's politicized what they're doing right now, and so I think we need to have a very strong conversation about monetary policy.
They've politicized it? I mean, the core mandate of the Bank of Canada is to control inflation, and really the only tool in their toolbox is to raise interest rates. So if there are other policy options that has to come from governments or something, it can't come from Tiff Macklem and the Bank of Canada, right? I mean, what would you have them do?
Well, they're rapidly raising them. They need to stop doing this. There has to be a pause. I mean, if you look at countries in the world that did this early, their inflation has not gone down. Chile, all of these other countries that acted faster than we did in Canada with raising interest rates to try and tackle inflation, it hasn't worked. That means there are other things driving inflation, and interest rates are not going to solve it. It's bottlenecked supply chains. It's a war in the Ukraine. A lot of things that raising interest rates are not going to address.
Right. No, there is some economic...
Except it will cause a lot of pain on workers.
Well, I don't think anyone thinks the next year is going to be easy for anyone based on just where all of the indicators are going. Sure. But, there's a lot of economists who will tell you interest rate hikes take 12, 18 months to work into the system before you can actually see the impact. So what would you have Tiff Macklem do? Just stop raising rates from where they are right now?
Yes, we have to stop, have a pause, look at what is actually truly causing the problem, and stop providing or putting solutions that are not actually fixing anything except causing more pain.
So my colleague Peter Armstrong spoke with Tiff Macklem about this last week, and he said, what about this idea? Because Jim Stanford, who I know you know
yes,
well, he's also suggested the pause and wait and see effect. And essentially the governor of the Bank of Canada said, if we wait and we're wrong to wait, the action that will be required in the future will be worse than what we're doing right now. So it's better to be sure now rather than have an extreme correction by pausing interest rates and having to act on an even tougher way in the future.
I would argue that they're not sure that it's going to correct the problem. And if they look at in other places where this action has been taken, it isn't solving the problem. Mm-hmm. There are other things causing inflation right now.
Right, and so the supply issue is something you can't solve with interest rates. I mean, untangling and droughts in agricultural belts and getting grain out of Ukraine, it's obviously a more complicated thing than just, people having extra money to buy things. But I wonder when you look at this, whether the bank causes it or not, it looks at this point that a recession is probable, if not likely, at this point in time. And I know one of the things you're asking for here is a revamped employment insurance program to help deal with this, because whether it's caused by interest rates or not, it seems some job losses or a slowing of the job market is inevitable because of global factors. What do you want to see in a revamped EI?
Well, first of all, we had, through the pandemic, what I would call temporary measures in the system, which really helped. So people were able to access the program a little easier. The benefits were a little higher. And all of these things that kind of clawed back or basically punished workers were suspended. And then in September, all those temporary measures, which actually made the program better, disappeared. And so we really need to look at what was working, why it was working, and make sure that that's the program that we have in future. Oddly, here we are at the same time saying, the Bank of Canada is even saying, we're going to hit into a recession, and our response from government as a policy lever level is to go back to a program that wasn't working. It makes no sense.
So what do you want to, like, when these job losses could hit, or when this slowdown could hit, I don't know if you have the time to do a fully reformed or revamped employment insurance time, just the way government moves on policy redesign. So are you advocating for that on a permanent measure, or going back to more specific temporary measures like we had during COVID?
Well, they could permanently do it in a day. They create at CERB in a week. It's not like we can't do amazing social programs if you put your mind to it. So yeah, they could easily do this. They know the temporary measures that are needed. Those could be made permanent.
Have you had any response from the government on this idea? I mean, are you getting a friendly ear from the federal Liberals?
We're meeting with the minister responsible for EI this week, so we'll be reiterating this to her. But I mean, it's been in their mandate letter. It's in her mandate letter to have a permanent reform of EI, so we have to get to it.
Okay, one more thing I want to touch on with you. Bill 28.
Yes.
The Ford's government's Bill 28 to impose a contract on CUPE and use a notwithstanding clause to strip them of their bargaining rights. Revoked today through Bill 35, passed unanimously in Queen's Park. Where are labor relations right now after this? Do you think any other government's going to attempt to use a notwithstanding clause to strip people of bargaining rights after this?
They'd be silly to do so.
They may still do it, though.
They may still do
know.
it, and we'll have to respond the same way that we did now, which was, you know, an incredible coalition of unions coming together and saying this is not on, and including our own union, working with the public sector unions and sending a very clear message to the Ford government that, you know, we're with them. This is a slippery slope. Next year, it could be private sector workers and their union rights being attacked and denied. So it was really, you know, an incredible show of solidarity when you think about it. And this is not always the case in the labor movement, as we know. And I think, you know, the Ford government did the right thing. They listened. So, yeah.
No, when a big chunk of your voting coalition is mad at you, you might want to change course.
You might want to change course, yes.
But I wonder, just as a final point, where does this leave things now? Because we went from sort of a take it or leave it tough talk from the education minister at the beginning of a week to a I'm willing to take water in my wine, but from the premier a week later, and sort of begging the unions now to be more conciliatory at the table. Has the Ford government essentially handed Labour the upper hand in these talks with the way they handled this?
No, I think that there has to be, you know, a negotiated deal. That has to happen. But they're still the government. They have a lot of power. So the reality is, you know, the best thing for these workers is for the government to actually respect their rights, sit down, negotiate a fair agreement, get it done.
Okay. Lana Payne, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.